Well, welcome everyone. Happy Black History Month. Happy Black Mental Health Week. And welcome to Communal Mental Health, how we care for our mental health together. My name is Jocelyn Spence, and I serve as the Director of Mental Health and Wellness for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. As a general ministry of the Disciples Church, the NBA collaborates with leaders and with health and social service organizations to strengthen and transform communities through compassion, healing, and justice. NBA's mental health and wellness program focuses on creating communities of compassion and care with an integrated vision of wellness that prioritizes a holistic approach centered in justice, equity, theology, spirituality, and clinical awareness. Note that during this webinar, you may follow along via automated transcription using the AI generated captions. You can look for the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Also note that we will have a question and answer period at the end of our time together, but please feel free to share your comments and questions as the webinar is going along using our chat or Q&A feature. So, as our program area prioritizes mental health justice and wellness equity for the upliftment of all people, during this Black History Month, we are providing culturally relevant spaces to practice and discuss resources for Black mental health and wellness. Earlier this month, we held a soul care, which can be watched on our YouTube channel. And we have a webinar focused on sharing about mental health from the pulpit and other religious leadership roles that will be happening next Thursday evening. Evening for the East Coast, afternoon for the West Coast. Self-care is so important for our mental health, and we hear about self-care all the time. But we also need communal care. Studies show that religion, social, and emotional support from family, peers, and community, and Black identity are some of the most significant protective factors for Black mental health. Today's discussion will focus on culturally relevant ways we can be intentional about our mental health care in the same ways we are intentional about our spiritual care, and how we can do this work of care as a community. I am so grateful to have a panel of wonderful, wonderful people to share with you today. So, first, today we are joined by therapist Joy McCreary. Joy is a pre licensed master level marriage and family therapy resident, therapist, behavioral consultant, and certified life coach. She's also certified in yoga, spirituality, and wellness, and is currently a candidate for a doctoral degree in healthcare administration. Joy is a well versed, culturally aware professional with years of experience in leadership, management, academia, clinical care, and ministry. She provides psychotherapy for adult individuals, couples, families, and groups. She also develops resources, tools, and facilitates interactive lectures around mental health, holistic wellness, gender, and sexuality. She is passionate about helping individuals develop healthy personal and professional practices that serve them well. Joy is also a member of our MBA's mental health equity cohort, and we are so grateful to have you with us today, Joy. Next on our panel, we have today Reverend Dr. Milton Keys. Dr. Keys is a preacher, teacher, and producer who has been in ministry for 24 years. He uses these three gifts to change the world. Although he was born with cerebral palsy and a bleep diagnosis, Milton has let nothing stop him from achieving his goals. Despite being given the 2 year life expectancy, and he was supposed to have severe cognitive disabilities, he has earned 3 degrees. He has produced and released 13 musical albums, 4 plays, 1 ballet, and held 8 youth summits in the last decade. His passion for education is realized through his work developing young artists and as Chief Technical Officer and Instructional Coach at Indie Urban Youth Music Academy. He has also lectured students of all ages through motivational speaking and poetry. He became an ordained minister in 2007 and received his Master's of Divinity from Christian Theological Seminary in 2017. Just this past May, He received his doctorate in ministry from Christian Theological Seminary and has delivered sermons to congregations at several services, conferences, and national conventions throughout the Midwest and through motivational speaking and poetry. We are so grateful to have you with us today, Reverend Dr. Key. And last on our list today, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Matt and Dr. Mary Harris. Since 1986, Dr. Matt and Dr. Mary Harris have built Project Impact from an idea to a nationally recognized program that has been recognized by three presidents of the United States, including both President Bush and President Obama. Both Matt and Mary received their bachelor's degrees from Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Dr. Matt received his Master of Divinity degree from Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis and is an ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. He also earned his doctorate degree from Fuller Theological Seminary in California. Dr. Mary received her master's in business administration from Colorado Technical University and her PhD in organizational management at the Graduate Theological Foundation in Oklahoma City. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Matt and Dr. Mary. So we're going to begin our panel today with each group of our panelists sharing a bit from their position in the work that they are doing and how that connects to communal mental health. And so first, I will invite Joy to share with us more about who she is, what she does, and share her presentation with us on communal mental health. Joy.
Hello, and thank you everyone for joining. Excited to share with everyone. So, excuse me, I am going to be talking about Black mental health and communal care, taking an action-centered care approach for the layers that we have in the Black community. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So who am I? Jocelyn shared pretty much essentially all the things about me. I am a couples, marriage, and family therapist first. It is primarily what I do. I enjoy doing it. I really enjoy helping people learn how to be intentional and commit to the change in their life, even when their path is unclear or unknown. I'm also the founder of Joyology 5155, where we focus on mental health, health and sexual wellness, education, capacity building, and training. We have a conscious intent with our efforts to offer a safe, nourishing, educating, and healing space, not exclusively, but we do have an intentional focus with access towards those in the BIPOC and LGBTQ community. All right, next slide. So first, we're going to talk about the effects on Black mental health. Okay, and so we're just going to talk about some facts. So according to your SAMHSA, the National Mental Health Alliance, and Mental Health America, here are some facts. So 16% of people in the Black community reported having a mental illness. 22% of those reported a serious mental illness over the last year. 39% of the Black community receive mental health services compared to your non-Hispanic whites, and which is 52%. So that number to me kind of speaks to some of those things we'll talk about as far as disparities, access, and some of the challenges that are affected with Black mental health. As we talk about representation, which is very important within the Black community, less than 2% of the American Psychological Association members are a part of the Black community. So representation is low within the field. So sometimes there is some of that hesitation as well, and that's some of the effects when we're talking about mental health and communal care. Being a part of the Black community, sometimes they're less likely than whites to report a persistent symptom of emotional distress, such as the feelings that we feel of sadness, or how things might be a challenge. In the Black community, they are living below the poverty line and are more than twice as likely to report serious psychological distress than those more financially secure. So for me, that fact kind of shared how the Black community is affected by their own financial stability and some of those economic disparities and adversities that come across within the Black community. And then lastly, that in the community, people hold beliefs. There's a lot of stigma to being psychologically open, to seeking help. So then, therefore, that does sometimes detour or navigate some of the ways that coping behaviors happen. And so we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. Next slide. So what does it mean to take an active action-centered care approach for the layers in the Black community? And we're going to talk about what those layers are. But essentially, it's just a continual effort to pursue support and wellness of the whole person within the Black community, while respecting and holding space for one's intersectionalities within their lived experience. And so this is, Black community and communal care is continual. It's something that's ongoing, and there's layers to it. So it's an ongoing process, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Okay, next slide. Actually, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the slide? I do want to talk about that. So I did use a quote um, from the founder, the person who coined the term intersectionality, a partial quote, because that's really what stood out to me. And that is about the intersectionality is a prism that brings to light. And so when I thought about the prism, this kind of goes into the way that we can hold space for ourselves as well as our community. Prisms, depending on the environment, depending on the perspective in which someone may be looking through the prism, will depend on how you show up and what you see. And so when we think about respecting and holding space for the intersectionality, just kind of thinking about intersectionality as a prism, thinking about even the spiritual beliefs, that you may have as your higher power as a prism. When that light shines in, depending on where you're standing, is going to depend on how you see things, how you experience things, how the person might next to you might, same prism, just different ways we see it. So when I think about that, that really stuck out with me. Okay, next slide now. So when we're thinking about the layers, for me, leading with love, and recognizing the uniqueness of a shared cultural experience. So in this action, it is important to lead with love. These are just a few that I wanted to just highlight of the layers within the Black community, but they are not all encompassing, okay? And I was very intentional, which is something that when we're thinking about communal care, particularly within the Black community, about languaging, there are certain ways that we can kind of restrain things. So I chose the word uniqueness of the shared, cultural experience. So some of those things are your complex family connections and beliefs. In the Black community, the kinship structures, there's a lot of different dynamics and movements to how in the Black community we see our community. We see how we are related. Someone may be a sister who's not biologically related, but they are our sister, and there's no other changing that. Again, there are the complexions of stigma and judgment within the family structure. And sometimes that can be passed down, as we have here, through generational beliefs. Sometimes, in the Black community, a stigma of, well, I don't want to be crazy, or, sometimes there's also those things that where the ways that you respond to stress and that you're taught to be able to do those things, that can be complex within a family system. And so those things oftentimes are held by strong spiritual and cultural practices. Oftentimes in the Black community, we expression through spirituality and music. Those are ways that you will usually find the Black community coming together communally. And that reliance on that community is big. It's very much so how people look at the solidarity of things. And then there's also those systemic things as well, as far as disparities, mistrust in health care systems. Next slide. So how do we offer communal care? So these are things that we're becoming intentional with self and service to build a connected community. And with that, feel free to screenshot this. through mutual support collectives. And so those are being able to find spaces where you can go back and forth and kind of barter or bring things to the table that you can help as a collective community of support. Finding holistic practitioners, such as doulas or midwives, wellness and healing justice circles. MBA was life-saving for me as far as healing justice circles in my particular cohort. There are plenty that you can look through. I also have some at the end of the presentation that you can screenshot. Safe support space, safe space, excuse me, support groups. So those are just finding people who have common issues, particularly with your problem or challenge of where you might need care and having a safe space to do so. And that, again, these are things you can show up in service or attend to with yourself. And then community health work. Those are practically advocates who can navigate the system in the community, who have resources. And then, of course, seeking out culturally respective, sensitive, and aware professional help. Okay, next slide. So this is something you definitely want to screenshot. I'm not going to go through all the questions, but one of the things with stigma, this was something I thought about was how do we seek professional help? So I thought of 10 questions that would be awesome to be able to advocate for yourself, to be able to help navigate and kind of help to decrease some of the stigma and some of those voices and narratives that may come about. So, couple questions are just, do they have experience working with a person of your culture or background? How do they feel about it? Um, what if after a couple sessions, they don't think it's a good fit? Do they work with clients who align with your gender relationship or sexual orientation? So definitely take a screenshot. Feel free to share this with your community circle, but this is absolutely something that can help with the actions to the layers within the Black community. Next slide. So this is also just be well communally. Resources, resources, resources. I will always say communal health is kind of having a pocket of resources. So these are just a few of the different resources that lend itself to ways that I suggested that we can do communal care. So, you know, you have your BEAM, your Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. You have Therapy for Black Girls, where you can find different therapists of resources who were, you know, who look like you. Black Girl in Own, definitely amazing resource to be able to navigate the holistic kind of wellness spaces. You also have some others there. All right, next slide. All right, so that sums up just kind of my portion, sharing my experience. I thank you all for lending me your ears. And then, of course, next slide, if you all want to get in contact, there's my contact information as well. I appreciate your time and look forward to hearing everyone else.
Thank you so much, Joy. And as we stated in our full introductions, we will go through each presentation and then we'll have a time for conversation amongst the whole group and to take your questions. So if you have thoughts that are coming up, please feel free to put them in the chat as we're going along and sharing what those questions or thoughts that you may be having. All right, so I will welcome Reverend Dr. Milton to share with us next.
God bless you. I am so happy to be here today. Today, I want to discuss mental health and disability considerations for a healthy community. Let's go to the next slide. So who am I? I was born with cerebral palsy, which is a condition that affects my motor skills. So tying shoes and things of that nature are hard for me. I am an ordained disciples minister. I've been ordained for a while, but I became an ordained disciples minister around 2021. So I've been a disciple for just a little while. I did my doctorate focused on disability, and I am the founder of Advocates Empathy. Our mission is helping organizations build spaces where people with disabilities feel safe or welcomed and have access to abundant life. So as I thought about what I can contribute to this conversation, being on a panel with such wonderful mental health experts, I wanted to focus more generally on how we can create a healthy community and how disability advocacy can help accommodate that. Here's my premise. Next slide. A healthy community is one where everyone feels welcomed, included, safe, and connected. So if there's a person in your community that does not feel safe or included or welcome, then we don't have a healthy community. To have a healthy community, we need effort from everyone. We can't expect members that may have mental health disabilities to do all the work. I love how Ms. Joy talked about a community of care. I want to work with that a little bit. How can we foster a community where everyone is welcome, where everyone is happy and healthy? So I begin to think of what are some conditions or situations where people may struggle connecting in a communal ways. Now, I'm not an expert, that's why these are so general, but I want you to think about some things. Next slide. If someone has anxiety, they may be anxious around crowds or deadlines or family gatherings or even certain uncomfortable conversations. One that has post-traumatic stress disorder may have problems with noises or certain situations or even stories. A person with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I hope I said that right. But they might have struggle sitting still in a certain event, or they might need more space. Neuroatypical is really not a mental health disability, but they interact differently with their community. The way they communicate may be different. The way they take social cues may be different. The way they perceive noise or lights may be different. All of these examples have an effect on how someone may perceive their community and interact with their community. So next slide, here's my questions. How do we support members of our communities with disabilities having to do with their mental health? Well, let's go next slide. I got two steps. First thing I want to do is destigmatize and normalize. There's no one in life that won't either break a limb or experience some kind of disability because of accident or their age or trauma or something. We all have the opportunity, and I believe we'll experience disability at some point in our life. That means it's normal. And when something is normal, you plan for it. So if when something is normal, you can make ways to adapt to it. Next slide. So because I know that there are people that may have some issues, I'm going to create an adaptive space. I'm going to ask myself, who is coming? Who is participating? What might they need to feel welcome? If I know the child may have autism, I might do some activities different so that child does not feel excluded. If I know my sister-in-law has trauma around a family event, when we have the reunion, we don't need to talk about those things. If I know my brother has PTSD, we don't need to have fireworks. So what I'm saying is we need to create this adaptive space. And the way you do that is to make sharing safe. We should be able to talk about these things because when we talk about it, we can adjust. The problem in our community sometimes is we don't talk about these disabilities. So when people have them, the community is not built for them. And the community has no way of knowing. So if you discuss the issues, the community can have that communal care that Jordan mentioned. Finally, we got to safeguard against emergency. And this is important because our police officers and others are not trained to handle mental health emergencies. So when we don't talk about things that can't be prepared for, versus if our community knows I need to do X, Y, Z when this happens for Milton, so Milton can be comfortable. I don't have to call an authority who is less knowledgeable and less ready to deal with the consequences of this situation. So my main point is we need to have a discussion around mental health and disability so we can create spaces that are welcoming for all people. God bless you.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Keys. Oh, so much good stuff in there for us to be considering when we are creating a healthy community that everyone feels included in, especially those with mental health disabilities and physical disabilities as well. All right, we are going to shift over to Dr. Matt and Dr. Mary Harris to share with us.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Harris, along with my wife, Mary. Mary and I are the founders of Project Impact, and this year we will celebrate 37 years of service in the Los Angeles area. One of the things that we've discovered, there's an old saying that goes, your whole life can change in a second and you don't even see it coming. And that's what happened to Mary and I when we were caught in the crossfire of a drive-by shooting. And nothing in my formal training could have prepared me for this. I didn't know whether I should pray for the brother and then run him over or run him over and then pray for him. But all I know is that they were shooting bullets in front of us. And the scary thing is that in the midst of all of my hopes and dreams for the future, is that I did not know whether the next bullet coming out of the barrel of that gun would have my name on it. second experience that radically changed my life, the trajectory of my life, and Mary and I, was preaching funerals of kids that weren't as fortunate as Mary and I to walk away from that drive-by shooting. And when you preach those funerals, the one thing that you ask and you walk away with is, it didn't have to end this way. What does it take in order to reach these children that feel as if that it's necessary to wake up in the morning, put their clothes on, load a gun, and want to go out and kill somebody? And the disproportionate effect that this has had on the African American community. And what it did was it changed radically the way that Mary and I decided to do ministry with our church. And there wasn't a day that went by where somebody wasn't knocking at the door of the church asking for help.
Right.
Well, I certainly appreciate my classical training. Many people were not asking the kind of questions that oftentimes we ask in our seminaries. These folks were asking, can God get my child off of drugs? Can God reduce the violence in our community? And so we decided to develop the capacity to respond to the very real needs and hurts of our community. So I'd like to turn it over to my wife, Mary, and she's going to share with you a little more information with regards to our service. Next slide, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us and to be part of such a wonderful group, sharing such needed information for all of our communities. And it's so great that we're able to partner together in order to do so. We're in one of the highest behavioral health service areas of need in Los Angeles County. And as you can see, that's SPA 6, and it's predominantly in the communities of Compton, Florence, Firestone, Baldwin Hills, Linwood, Watson, Willowbrook. We learned a long time ago, as we were networking with a lot of the families, that some of the biggest areas of need for those families that we serve were areas of violence, trauma, neglect, and abuse. And so we had to think outside of the box. I was raised in a traditional setting. Father was a pastor, minister. I'm a PK, preacher's kid. And in that traditional setting, sometimes you don't always know how important it is to go outside the traditional setting in order to reach the needs of so many of those who are suffering from things that we may not have wanted to deal with. As one of my sisters said earlier, some of those things were considered taboo when you felt like you had mental issues and things like that. But the need is so great. So we stepped outside of that traditional church setting and we asked a critical question as we networked with other fellow organizations within our community. We asked, how can we help? How can we be of service? So the direct response is that we needed to really fill our toolbox with other tools that could reach out and really be helpful in those areas. So the things that they needed and the response that they wanted us to have was, we needed to have counseling, we needed to do tutoring, crisis intervention, those kinds of things. And we had to create a staffing that was able to address those needs. So we needed licensed therapists, registered interns, case managers, clinical directors, program directors, psychiatrists, peer recovery specialists, and others that could help meet those needs of our community. And in doing so, as we began to do that, we also knew that we had to create better tools in order to work. So we were very, very fortunate to really, really work hard to become a medical certified organization, Medi-Cal's organization. And then we were also recently, as we said here, awarded with a $3.3 million contract to work with the Department of Mental Health in our area. Next slide. So because we're networking with all of those in our community, we were able to identify what the essential needs are, like I said, because when we did ask that critical question, we realized that we really need to have the counseling services for our families. We needed to have targeted management, case management for our families, crisis intervention. So we were able to do that as well. And of course, the mental health contract that we now have. But one of the main things is no man is an island. So we learned how to collaborate on a regular basis with all organizations within our community so that we could make sure that there were well-rounded services being provided to all of those that we serve. And so we've been able to do that. And we're so grateful that we're able to meet the needs of so many in so many ways. Dr. Mann, I'm gonna let you go ahead with the next slide.
When we started Project Impact and we looked at the critical needs within our community, what we discovered is that the African-American community made up 8% of the county's population. However, we made up 30% of those receiving mental health services, which was 3 times the amount of psychiatric hospitalization and medication than white. What we also found out was that we had only about of the providers, only 2% of the providers were African American providers, people that were within the community that we could say were indigenous to the community. And as you know, in the cornerstone of any treatment plan is to be able to know who you can trust. And so the challenge was, even though we had the resources within the community to be able to provide mental health and behavioral health services, many African-American agencies did not qualify for those funding opportunities. And so what it did was it created a vacuum. You had many agencies parachuting into the community that had no relationship to the community. Also, you had agencies that did not cultivate resources within the community. So what you had was you had recidivism rates that were high because you had a community of care that did not build trust or cultivate resources within the community. Next slide. What we also saw was that based upon the treatment model was that when we looked at the distribution of ethnicity with regards to a treatment model, that African Americans were the least to receive treatment models versus a medical model. That was so you had a disproportionate number of African Americans because therapists simply did not know how to relate to our community. What you had was within the distribution of services, the treatment model, African Americans received the least of those treatments, but the highest of being able to be treated medically versus being able to have full service partnerships, parent education, and other treatment services that were low on the list. Next slide, please. What we found was this: when we received our contract with the Department of Mental Health, it was because what we were trying to do was to show that there is a difference as a faith-based community to be able to take the lead in terms of developing relationships and cultivating relationships within the community. Those partnerships included government partners, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and of course, a sampling of our collaborative services, as you can see, were many, including many services that helped our agency develop and cultivate technical assistance for our development. One of the common concerns of many of our clients was that they didn't know that many of these services within the community existed, because many service providers and many even faith-based organizations did not take the time to cultivate and to take the time to know what those services were within the community. So a part of what we try to do with Project Impact, as you can see that last sentence on the bottom in green, it says more than connecting children and youth and families to services. We are connecting them to community, a continuum of care, providing support for families. And what we have discovered is this, is that the church is uniquely suited to being able to provide a continuum of care. What many of our faith communities are lacking are the tools. Mark Twain once said, if a hammer was the only tool on our toolbox, that would imply all of our problems were nails. And so many of our traditions, as we discovered when I was pastoring, many of our traditions simply did not have the capacity to be able to reach and stabilize families that came knocking at the door. And so we began to expand our services. And as a result, as Dr. Marriott mentioned, we were able to receive Medi-Cal, or certification as a Medi-Cal provider. We are a behavioral health contract service within the County of Los Angeles and working with unserved and underserved communities. Next slide, please. One of our, as an outcome positive outcome as a result of what we have done working with the faith-based community is a program we call differential response. Differential response is basically when calls come into the hotline and they are not substantiated. What we did as a faith-based collaborative, I directed a faith-based collaborative called the Compton Watts Interfaith Collaborative. And so these referrals from the hotline would then come to us. Our collaborative was made up of several churches where we had the opportunity to respond to these cases coming in off of the hotline, but they were not substantiated. What we also discovered is that many of the calls that were coming into the hotline, 60% of those calls that were coming into the hotline were at one point unsubstantiated. So we wanted to reach that population of folks to be able to prevent them from ever going into the system. So we had about 2,588 families that were referred into this program. What we discovered is this: 15% came back with a repeat referral after 1 year versus 40%. 3% had substantiated referrals versus 15%. 2% were open cases as DCFS cases versus 15%. What we discovered was that collaboration worked. And so this was one of the tools that we developed in our community. And what we're also presenting is the fact that as we share these ideas with you, we also felt it was very important for us to learn how to connect the dots with regards to community engagement so that we can make a difference within our community. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Yes, God bless.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matt and Dr. Mary, for, oh my goodness, just sharing all of the great work that you all are doing in Los Angeles and the surrounding area. I want to invite the rest of our panelists back on screen as we go into a moment in this time that we have left to just share a little bit more as a group. Again, I will remind our listeners, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and put those in the chat. So one of the things I want to begin with here is, as we think about the thread through everyone's presenting in areas, it really came back to, for us to have a healthy community, for us to have communal care, there is a huge responsibility that we have to building relationships, to listening to each other and knowing what the community needs, knowing what your family member needs, knowing what the people in your congregation might be in need of, so that we are creating a safe space in which people's needs can actually be met. And I just want to note with safety as well, oftentimes that is the first need, and one of the best ways to take care of someone's mental health is by providing them with a safe space. But with all of that being said, from you all, various contexts, I'm wondering if there are some steps forward that you can give to our listeners regarding how they can continue to create these collaborative spaces. We have clergy who may be listening in, we may have community partners who are listening in that may want to partner together. And so I'm curious if there are some specific steps that you all might want to give that would help them to move forward with all of this information that has been shared today, right in their own communities. So whoever would like to jump in first.
I would like to two quick things. One is that we've coined a phrase to be transformational. You must become relational. I think it's important for us to learn how to develop a relationship with our community if we're talking about community change. And if we're talking about impacting lives, we've got to be able to get to know the community. So the one thing that we did was we got to know our schools. We started with our schools, and we have memoranda of understanding with Compton Unified Schools, Linwood Unified Schools, and Los Angeles Unified. And once you go into those schools, you see the need, and the statistics that we talk about in terms of working with the African-American community becomes alive. You see it up front. And then the second thing is being able to ask the question, how can we help? Versus just coming into the community and saying that we've arrived. and we've got all these wonderful programs, is that are the programs, do they have the capacity to respond to the needs and hurts of our children? And so then you look at harvesting those resources within your community and within your church so that you become an agent of change within the community because you're directly responding to those needs and hurts of the community.
Thank you. Anybody want to jump in? Dr. Keys, were you? You still on mute?
Okay, here we go. Now, I said it in my presentation, you have to normalize this stuff. James Baldwin, in our paraphrase, said to be a black man in this country is to be, and to be relatively conscious is to be angry all the time. Life is traumatic. Life causes mental health issues just by living. So this is normal. One of the problems we have connecting is we still live in the lie that this is something special. Who you know that won't break their ankle or have a child or have Alzheimer's or get sick and not be able to walk for a day because they're so sick? No, who you know that will not have any of those things happen? Nobody. We're all going to have a disability. The problem is disability isn't normal, so we don't talk about it. We're ashamed of it. And because it's a secret, we can't be in community. So I really think we just gotta talk about this stuff.
So can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. I would like to just really, share even with you were saying, Dr. Matt, about just the collective, being able to be in collaboration and understanding the needs. If you are in a position to offer services, I would, for that communal care, doing a community needs assessment. And if you aren't able to do that, to really see what that looks like, but that also taps into what you're saying, Dr. Keys, with creating that adaptive space, really knowing what is needed in your spaces, knowing what is needed versus, just coming in. But that collaboration is really important. Being a marriage and family therapist, relationship is everything, and it's all around us. It's all in how we show up. It's all in our systems of life. So when we are going through those traumatic things, when we do have things that we need to normalize, being able to know the need. And sometimes, we know, and also that goes in kind of what I was sharing about the action-centered care, being in that continual pursuit to know what those lived experiences are. They may be different 2-3 years from now. So being in that continuum of that pursuit for communal care is something that I would also share, in addition to those creating those spaces and normalizing things and talking about the transformative and relational relationships and communication.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. This is some good stuff here, y'all. And I hope that, for those who are listening and who may be watching this later, that you take these keys that are being shared and begin to engage the community right where you are. I think sometimes it is hard for people to get into it because they think that it has to be a grand, process in order to begin building those relationships in their community. But to your point, to say, hey, I have a service, or hey, I have this interest. Hey, I want to make this a safe space, or I want to connect these two people that I know who are doing the work of mental health or disability care, hey, let me connect them with my congregation, or let me connect, just handing over information to move forward into a needs assessment for the community. So one of the other questions that I want to ask you all before we finish up, as we think about caring for ourselves, right? We've talked a lot about, this safe community, communal care. There are some ways we can take care of ourselves every single day, right? Daily. There's some things that we could do maybe monthly, and even some things that we might want to consider annually. So if you think about that daily, monthly, annually, ways of caring for ourselves, if there's some thoughts that come to mind that you can offer to us as we finish up and how we are caring for ourselves and our communities, any strategies.
I would say, Jocelyn, rest. Rest. This work takes energy. You have to give a lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like, that saying goes, you have to fill your cup to pour into others. And so in that, you also have to make sure that you are resting. You're resting for yourself. And we're not just talking about laying in the bed rest. We're talking about laying in the bed, disconnecting from phones, disconnecting from technology, disconnecting from the laptops, disconnecting from TV, disconnecting from news, disconnecting from social media, resting. So that way that work and that active pursuit and that action can continue. If we're weary, then, we're no longer doing no rest for the weary. No, rest. So that's probably what I would share as one of and it can also be a form of social justice, resting. I can't think of the author's name, but it's the Nap Ministry. A wonderful book, Rest is Resistance. Excuse me if I'm not saying that right, but the Nap Ministry is a wonderful resource to kind of look at even how we are actively serving ourselves and serving the community.
Well, one of the things that my wife and I do is that we create a calendar, and we look at our calendar and how we spend our days, engaging our staff. We have about 50 staff. And of course, we're either putting out a fire, lighting a fire, or keeping one simmered. And everybody on our staff has their own story. And sometimes their story becomes our story. And so we're learning how not to bring that work at home with us, or working with many of the clients that we have, which can break your heart when you're dealing with neglect, abuse, and those that are suffering from violence or trauma. And so we look at our calendar and making sure we start our day. What does our day start? Our day starts with prayer. My wife, we wake up in the morning and we start off with prayer, not looking at CNN, not looking at the news, but, we start off with prayer and a little devotional, and then my wife and I drive in, to work. And so it's about 45 minutes in, 45 minutes back. So we have an opportunity to kind of decompress, or to, praise God and ramp ourselves up. Then we also make sure that within our schedule, you have to be intentional, or else what happens is that life takes over, and then you become a reflection of neglect. So, you have to factor in personal care, personal development. There are times when I set aside time to read and look at, and then my wife is very assertive with regards to, she'll say, Matt, it's time to put away all this stuff.
Amen.
And we need to go down to the ocean, take our shoes off,
And stop.
run our feet in the sand, and just enjoy a sunset. And or we need a couple days of that, and we do that. Or we'll go to a concert, and with some of our friends, and have some dinner, and I love Southern California. Even though a lot of it's being washed out into the ocean right now. I just simply love Southern California. I love the beaches, and it's a time for me to, just refresh. And so we have to take time, to allow God to speak to us. And then once there is seed for the sower, then you are in a better position to give back. And you're able to give back with joy, with a smile on your face. And so I would say that, personal care is so, so important because how can you get sort of the Bible says, how can you get a speck out of somebody else's eye when you've got a mote in your own? When you're suffering from self-care, or there are morality issues that are setting in, there are compromise issues, and there's burnout, frustration. So those become very important issues and things that we have to be intentional about our calendar.
Thank you so much for sharing. I want to pause and see if Dr. Keys wanted to add anything.
That sounds good. I would agree. Especially the calendar. I'm learning, Dr. Harris, how to use my calendar better because there's so much floating around in the world that it's easy to miss something. So I use a lot of technology, but I'm learning how to make technology work for me in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
schedule. So now my last 2 days, my schedule has been scheduled to the minute, and I'm more productive.
Yeah, 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 yes.
Yes. Well, thank y'all for all of those wonderful strategies and, sharing what's important to you, because again, for people to hear that doing things like just go and take some time to go to the beach, just take some time to rest, just take some time to make sure that you're checking out how technology is going to work for you. Sometimes people have to hear that multiple times to see, yes, these are things that I can do. Again, it doesn't have to be this huge, big undertaking, but it's in those daily steps that we're making and those daily choices that we're making. So as we come to our time of closing, I just want to pause and see if there are any additional tips, resources, tools, or any last words from each of our panelists before we close.
Well, I guess in line with what we just talked about, I guess what I've really learned is to work smarter and not harder. Sometimes people think the harder I work, it's got to do this, got to do that. But you really have to work smarter and then trust God to give you the wisdom to know how to navigate so that you can accomplish the things that He's called you to do. So it's not about just doing, but it's really about being smart at what you're doing and really asking for wisdom.
I would like to just add on to that. My wife and I, we celebrate this year 46 years of marriage. Yay. Pat myself.
Yay.
She's put up with me all those years. And here's what we've learned.
Enjoy the journey, honey. Enjoying the journey.
There you go. It's enjoy the journey. Enjoy it. The joy of, and remember this, the joy of the Lord is your strength.
All right. Well, thank you all. There are no other comments, no other questions for us. I just want to thank our panelists again for being here with us, Reverend Dr. Milton, Dr. Matt, Dr. Mary, and Joy. We are so blessed by your work and honored to receive your wisdom and your professional and clinical expertise. And we pray that you will be blessed in the work that you continue to do to keep our communities well. To those who are watching and listening, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website at nbacares.org and our YouTube channel. And one of the ways that you can also stay informed of our work and be involved is to sign up for our newsletter at nbacares.org/newsletter. There are a few check boxes that you can mark to let us know that you're interested in mental health and wellness topics. Finally, if you would like to partner with our work of mental health and wellness, We welcome your financial support and we are ever grateful for those blessings. And you can donate online at nbacares.org/donate. So as we leave this space, may you remember to center your mental health and wellness. May you be supported by community for sustainable and safe care. May you be empowered to advocate for justice. May your mind, body, and spirit be replenished each and every day. May you remember that God wants you to be well, not just so you can serve, but because God loves you and sees you as good. Grace and peace be with you. Thank you for joining us today and for watching. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's been a
You're
pleasure.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.